broader mission: to be a beacon of hope where despair once dwelled, to rewrite the stories of children caught in cycles of adversity, and to nurture their potential with patience, love, and unwavering support. Richard's days became filled with moments that reminded him why he had embarked on this path, witnessing shy smiles turning into confident laughter, seeing children like Lena discover talents and passions, and hearing their voices grow stronger with each passing day. The Foundation's programs extended beyond education and financial aid. They offered mentorship, emotional healing, and a sense of belonging, things Amelia had always understood to be vital. Richard found solace in these tangible expressions of love, a reminder that grief, while profound, could also be the soil from which hope blooms. Through the Foundation, Amelia's legacy reached far beyond the boundaries of their shared life. It took on a life of its own, touching countless families and communities, and creating a ripple effect of kindness and compassion. Each success story was a chapter in a larger narrative, a narrative that Richard carefully tended, fueled by the memory of Amelia's belief in human dignity and potential. He often thought about how Amelia would have smiled to see children thriving, how her eyes would have sparkled witnessing the very dreams she had nurtured now unfolding. The Foundation became a living homage, a place where love was not confined to memory but was active and palpable, where it shaped futures and mended broken spirits. Richard's grief gradually transformed from a heavy burden into a quiet strength, a guiding force that propelled him forward with purpose and hope. He understood deeply that this foundation was not just a tribute but a continuation of Amelia's life's work, a testament to the power of love to heal wounds, bridge divides, and create new beginnings. Over time, the Amelia Foundation's reputation grew as a sanctuary for children in need, a place where they could find not only resources but also a family. Richard's efforts attracted others who shared the vision: volunteers, donors, and advocates, all united by the same belief that every child deserved the chance to rewrite their story. Through scholarship programs, educational workshops, creative arts initiatives, and emotional counseling, the Foundation became a multifaceted haven. Richard saw how Lena, once timid and withdrawn, blossomed into a young woman brimming with confidence and dreams, ready to give back to her community, embodying the cycle of love and generosity Amelia had inspired. This transformation was the heart of the Foundation's success, and Richard cherished every moment of it, knowing that in Lena's growth, Amelia's legacy was immortalized. In the quiet moments, Richard would often reflect on the journey, the pain of loss, the challenge of carrying a legacy, and the unexpected joy of seeing hope rekindled in the eyes of children. He realized that the true gift Amelia had left him was not just the memories they shared, but the responsibility and privilege to extend her love into the world, far beyond what either of them could have imagined. Through the Foundation, Amelia's spirit lived on, steadfast, gentle, and fiercely alive, illuminating lives and reminding everyone that from the depths of grief can emerge a legacy of compassion, resilience, and unbreakable love. And so, Richard continued, fueled by love and guided by the memory of Amelia, building a future where every child like Lena could find not just shelter and support, but the promise of a new beginning, a legacy of love, compassion, and second chances that would endure for generations to come. Every September, like clockwork, Richard Hale arrived at the quiet hillside cemetery just before dusk, his black coat stark against the fading golden light, his steps as precise and restrained as the man himself. Though hailed in headlines as a genius investor, a ruthless tycoon, a man who built empires from steel and silence, here, beneath the shade of a leaning willow tree, he was simply a widower, broken in places the world would never see. He knelt before the weathered stone that bore Amelia's name, brushing away leaves and tracing the engraved letters with a tenderness that hadn't touched his voice in years. They'd been married young, before the power, before the money, before cancer had taken her like a thief in the night. He spoke softly to her, confessions, memories, apologies, words too vulnerable for boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. It was the only time he allowed himself to be entirely human. This year, as the wind carried the scent of rain and drying earth, something unusual happened. A small voice interrupted the silence. "Hi." Startled, Richard turned. Standing a few feet away was a little black girl, no older than 6, with tight braids tied in blue ribbons and a rusted metal lunchbox clutched to her chest. Her dress was worn, her shoes scuffed, but her eyes held a strange mix of innocence and knowing. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I'm just waiting." He stared, unsure what to say. "Children didn't come here, not alone." "Waiting for what?" he asked, his voice rough with disuse. She looked at the grave beside Amelia's, an unmarked patch of grass that had always remained empty, and then at the lunchbox in her hands. "My mom said he'd come eventually," she whispered. "She said he was important but busy." The words struck him like a sudden gust, chilling and heavy. Richard's gaze dropped to the box she held, noticing now that it was scratched with faded stickers and initials. A.H. His heart faltered. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. "Lena," she smiled. "Lena Hale, that's what she told me. She said it was your name, too." The world tilted, his breath caught. Richard staggered back a step as if the earth itself had shifted. Amelia had written him letters before her death, ones he never opened, too afraid of what they might contain. Regrets, maybe, or worse, forgiveness he hadn't earned. He never imagined they might hide a secret this large. He looked again at Lena, her smile open, her presence impossibly calm, and he wondered how he'd missed something so monumental. "Your mother," he said slowly. "What was her name?" Lena's voice trembled slightly. "Alicia Harper. She said she met you a long time ago. Said you helped her once, but you didn't stay." The memory sparked, faint and flickering. A night long ago, a brief affair in the aftermath of Amelia's first chemo treatment, guilt and grief tangling into something reckless. He hadn't known. Or perhaps deep down he had, and he'd buried it like he buried everything else. Lena opened the lunchbox, revealing a few items. A photograph of a younger Richard with Alicia, a crumpled note in Amelia's handwriting, and a necklace, Amelia's. His knees gave out and he sank to the earth, tears surprising him as they slid freely down his cheeks. Amelia had known. She'd known, and somehow she had still left him this final grace. The note, now trembling in his hand, read, "If you ever find her, love her like I would. She's the best of us." His throat closed, his vision blurred. Lena sat beside him without a word, placing the necklace in his palm like a sacred offering. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The cemetery around them grew darker, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. But in that silence bloomed something unexpected. Connection, fragile and real. He looked at Lena, not a mistake, not an accident, but a miracle he didn't deserve. And in her face he saw Amelia's gentleness, his own eyes, Alicia's fire. He reached out slowly, uncertainly, and Lena leaned into his side without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting all along for this exact moment. The rusted lunchbox rested between them like a time capsule of pain, love, and second chances. Richard wrapped his arm around her, feeling the warmth of a life he never knew he had. As the wind rustled through the trees and the first drops of rain kissed Amelia's grave, Richard Hale, the man who had everything but had always felt empty, held his daughter for the first time and for once didn't feel alone. Richard stood in the doorway of the quiet sunlit room watching the girl, barefoot, delicate, and no older than 10, trace patterns on the window pane with her fingertip. She hadn't said much since he brought her in from the rain the night before, soaked to the bone and shivering like a leaf caught in a storm. Now, as he gently asked again, "Where are your parents?" she simply turned her head, wide brown eyes meeting his with a hollow kind of sadness. Her silence stretched into the space between them, a silence so thick it seemed to press against his chest. Finally she murmured, almost inaudibly, "I knew Amelia." Richard blinked, confused, the name, his late wife's name, sounding both foreign and sacred in the child's voice. "Amelia?" he echoed, stepping closer, heart hitching in his throat. "You knew her?" He sat down slowly across from her, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on his knees. The girl nodded once, her gaze drifting back to the window, where clouds gathered like memories across the sky. "She used to visit," the girl said quietly. "At the home." Richard's brows knit together. "Home?" She didn't elaborate, but something inside him began to unravel. Threads of his understanding of Amelia, of who she was beyond the woman he shared a life with. They had been married for 15 years before her sudden death 2 months ago. A car accident on a rain-slick road stealing her away while he waited at home, wondering what was taking her so long. She had never mentioned volunteering, Never mentioned a children's home. Never mentioned a girl like Lena. And yet here she was, small, fragile, carrying grief that looked too much like his own. She read to us, Lena said suddenly, her voice trembling. Stories about stars and forests and brave girls who found their way home. I remember her voice the most. It was soft, kind. Richard swallowed hard, something in his throat tightening. He could hear Amelia's voice in his memory. Warm, patient, filled with that quiet strength he'd always admired. The thought of her sitting with children, bringing them comfort, offering them stories as a balm against loneliness, both pierced and warmed his heart. "Did she talk to you?" he asked softly. "About me?" Lena shook her head. "No, just stories. But she always brought me a red ribbon. Every time. Said it looked nice in my hair." Her hand went instinctively to the faded ribbon tied at the end of her braid, frayed but cherished. Richard stared at it, recognition dawning. It was the same shade as the ribbon Amelia wore in their wedding photo. The one she always said reminded her of something beautiful from her childhood she could never quite explain. He felt the weight of not knowing, the sharp ache of how much of her had been hidden not from malice but perhaps from the same instinct that made her stories matter. Protectiveness, compassion, depth. "Do you have any family?" he asked again gently. Lena hesitated, then shrugged. "They left. I don't remember them much. Amelia was like family." The words, simple and unadorned, carried a weight that crushed Richard's heart. This girl, alone adrift, had found in Amelia something he thought had belonged only to him. And yet, as he looked at Lena, he realized Amelia had simply been more than he'd ever known. Her love hadn't been confined to their home, their life. It had spilled out into the world, into dark corners, into little hearts that needed light. She kept this part of her life secret, Richard said quietly, more to himself than to Lena. Not because it didn't matter, but maybe because it did. Too much. The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Softer, fuller, like a shared breath. Lena's eyes flicked to his, unsure. "Are you going to send me back?" she asked, and the words made Richard flinch. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a girl with no past, but a living piece of Amelia's legacy. She was the story Amelia hadn't gotten to finish, the one left on a rain-damp doorstep with too many unanswered questions. And somehow, impossibly, Richard felt Amelia in the room, felt her presence in the ribbon, in the quiet strength in Lena's voice, in the way the girl looked at him like she was hoping he might say no. "No," he said finally, his voice thick. "You can stay here, if you want to." A flicker of something, relief, maybe hope, moved across her face, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. Richard reached across the table, offering his hand. "We'll figure it out together." Lena took it, her fingers small and cold in his. Outside, the clouds began to break, and light spilled across the floor like the beginning of something new. Richard sat across from Lena in the quiet hush of the old sunroom, the late afternoon light pooling like honey across the faded floorboards. His fingers hovered over the metal latch of the lunchbox she had just handed him, a small, rust-flecked thing dented in one corner, the kind that once carried peanut butter sandwiches and warm notes written in a mother's hurried hand. "Go ahead," Lena said softly, her voice brittle as dried leaves. With a soft click, the box opened, and what he saw inside sent a ripple through the calm surface of his world. Old photographs lay atop a nest of carefully folded letters, yellowed with time and edged in wear, their corners curled like they, too, had secrets to keep. He picked up the first photo, a black and white snapshot of Amelia, radiant and laughing in her 20s, her arm around a teenage girl with familiar eyes. Lena, but not as Richard had known her. This Lena had a spark of youth, her hair wild in the wind, her smile wide and unguarded. And Amelia, his mother, the woman he had buried a month ago, looked at her with an affection that surpassed friendship. Confusion bloomed in Richard's chest, tightening into a knot. He flipped through the stack, each image a silent echo of something unspoken. The two women at a beach, building sand castles like children. Riding a carousel, sitting beneath a tree, foreheads touching. "We were more than friends," Lena said, almost inaudibly. Richard looked up, stunned. "She was the love of my life." The words fell between them like pebbles into still water, sending ripples of understanding into places he hadn't known existed. She spoke then, Not in a rush, but with the deliberate grace of someone finally unloading a burden too long carried. Lena had met Amelia in the summer of '73, when they were both escaping different kinds of expectations. Amelia from the weight of family tradition, Lena from the loneliness of being different in a world that had no name for who she was. Their love had bloomed quietly, in shadows and silences, in the hush of moonlit walks and secret notes passed in the hallway of a library where Amelia worked. But time had not been kind. There was fear of being found out, of hurting the families that expected marriages, children, a life painted in straight lines. When Amelia chose to marry, it wasn't out of betrayal but self-preservation, and Lena, with a breaking heart, let her go. "She wrote to me," Lena said, gesturing toward the letters. "Every year. Sometimes just a card. Sometimes pages. She sent pictures too, even after she had you. I never stopped loving her, and she never stopped loving me either." Richard's hands trembled slightly as he picked up a letter. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. Amelia had spoken of longing, of regrets carefully hidden behind smiles, of moments stolen in dreams. She'd written of Richard too, how proud she was of him, how she wished he could know the full truth someday. "She wanted you to know," Lena whispered, but she couldn't find the courage. "And after she passed, Her voice broke and she pressed a fist to her mouth. Richard sat there unmoving, his thoughts a storm. He had always known his mother was kind, strong, and strangely sorrowful. He remembered the way she would stare out the window in the early mornings, clutching a mug of tea like it held the pieces of her heart. He remembered how she never dated after his father left, how she always said, "Some loves aren't meant to be repeated." Now he knew why. A strange peace began to settle over him, not because the answers were simple, but because they were real, authentic. Painful, yes, but rooted in love. He looked up at Lena, who sat braced for rejection, her shoulders drawn tight. "You loved her," he said quietly. "Truly." She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I did. I still do." He reached across the table then, his fingers wrapping gently around hers. "Then I'm glad she had you, even if it had to be in secret." Lena broke then, sobs bubbling up from a place too long silenced, and Richard let her cry, the lunchbox still open between them. A time capsule of love, memory, and the invisible threads that tie lives together across time and silence. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the garden Amelia once tended, where lavender still bloomed and the wind carried the scent of something old and sweet and everlasting. Richard sat on the edge of the old armchair, its worn fabric sagging under his weight. A small wooden box of letters resting on his knees like a fragile secret finally unearthed. The sun filtered through the dusty windows of Amelia's study, catching flecks of dust in the air, making the room shimmer like a memory. Her scent still lingered, lavender and old paper, and it made his heart tighten. She had been gone only 3 weeks, yet it felt like a lifetime. The world quieter, dimmer, without her voice humming softly in the kitchen or calling his name down the hall. He'd found the letters by accident, hidden behind a stack of her favorite novels tied together with a fading blue ribbon. At first, he thought they were love letters, perhaps old remnants from their early days. But the name scrawled in Amelia's elegant handwriting stopped him cold. Lena. The first letter was dated 8 years ago, and as he read the careful, compassionate lines, his chest grew heavier with each word. Lena was Amelia's niece, daughter of her estranged sister whom Richard barely remembered, a woman who had disappeared into silence years ago after a bitter family quarrel. Amelia had never spoken of her again, never mentioned a niece, and certainly never shared what Richard now read in trembling disbelief, that Amelia had quietly, faithfully supported Lena and her ailing mother for nearly a decade. Rent, groceries, school supplies, even hospital bills. It was all there in Amelia's voice, both tender and firm, encouraging Lena through school, comforting her through her mother's illness, guiding her like a shadow mother from afar. Richard read on, tears slipping down his cheeks, a silent audience to a life he never knew his wife had lived. He wasn't angry. He couldn't be. But the shock of not knowing her fully, of loving someone so deeply while missing an entire chamber of her heart, made him feel unmoored. The letters revealed a woman stronger and more selfless than even he had imagined, someone who carried burdens in silence to spare others pain. who believed in love expressed not through grand gestures but through quiet constancy. As he turned each page, Lena came alive in his mind, a bright, kind girl growing up under Amelia's distant but unwavering care, her voice in the replies brimming with gratitude, confusion, sorrow, and eventually love. Lena's final letter, dated just weeks before Amelia's passing, was a heartfelt goodbye. Her mother had died peacefully in the spring, and she was about to leave for university, something Amelia had helped make possible. "You saved us," Lena wrote, "and I never understood how much until now." Richard pressed the paper to his chest, his breath shuddering. He thought of the many evenings Amelia had stayed up late, claiming to be lost in a book or a letter to a distant friend. The long walks she took alone, the afternoons she spent running errands without explanation. All of it made sense now. She had lived this parallel life with grace and secrecy, not out of shame, but because that was who she was, never wanting to burden him, never needing recognition. The truth didn't diminish his love for her. It deepened it, infused it with awe and grief and a strange kind of joy. In the quiet that followed, Richard stood and walked to the small desk where Amelia had written these letters. He sat, pulled out a fresh page, and began to write. Not to Lena, not yet, but to Amelia, as he had so often when they were apart. "My dearest Amelia," he began, the pen trembling in his hand. "Thank you for showing me what love looks like when no one is watching." Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the elm tree, scattering leaves like little notes across the yard. Richard paused, looked toward the window, and let the silence settle in his bones. Not as emptiness, but as a quiet echo of the life she had lived. Amelia had gone, but in these letters she had left him a map, not just of her heart, but of the kind of man he wanted to become. There was still time, he thought, to reach out to Lena, to honor Amelia's legacy not just in memory but in action. Folding the final letter carefully, Richard placed it back into the box, his fingers brushing the worn ribbon. In the years to come, he would revisit them often, not to mourn, but to remember, to listen, and to learn from the woman who had loved so deeply, so quietly, that her truest acts of kindness had nearly gone unnoticed. Richard sat in the quiet stillness of Amelia's old study, the late afternoon light spilling like liquid gold across the scattered letters and photographs she had left behind. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It echoed with the weight of things unsaid, of a love that had existed quietly between the lines. He hadn't known, not fully, not until now. She had carried the secret for nearly a decade, a truth hidden in the soft way she smiled at the boy who sometimes joined them for dinner, the way her eyes lingered just a little longer when she watched him walk away. His name was Noah, and he wasn't just some distant godchild or a neighbor in need of support. He was her son. Not by birth, but by heart. She had taken him in after his mother, a close friend from college, passed away unexpectedly. Richard had met the boy a few times, thought him polite and bright, but nothing more. He hadn't asked questions. Amelia never pushed. She knew him well enough to know that he never wanted children, not because he disliked them, but because he feared he wouldn't know how to love one properly. Feared becoming the kind of distant, critical father he had grown up with. Years ago, over a quiet dinner, he had spoken those words like they were a confession. Amelia had nodded gently and never brought it up again. He thought they had made peace with that decision. And yet here he was, surrounded by the truth that she had chosen to mother a child in secret, to give her love without ever demanding his understanding or approval. Richard felt the air tighten in his chest. It wasn't betrayal he felt. It was heartbreak, a piercing sense of sorrow that he hadn't known her heart even half as well as she had known his. She had never hidden her kindness, her softness. She simply chose not to make it his burden. In every note she wrote to Noah, her words overflowed with love and encouragement. "I know you're scared," one letter read, "but bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about walking through the fear anyway. I believe in you." There were dozens of them written over the years, each one folded carefully, saved like treasures. He could picture her writing them late at night after he had gone to bed, the light from her desk lamp spilling over her handwriting. She had given so much of herself quietly, asking for nothing in return. Not from him, not from the world. And now she was gone, and the silence she left behind roared louder than any storm. He wondered how many times she had longed to share her secret, how many times she almost let the truth slip only to pull it back out of love. For him, for the fragile peace they had built. He remembered the way she would watch Noah at his school plays, clapping with tears in her eyes, always seated near the back. She had told Richard she was attending a book club or visiting a friend. He never questioned it. He trusted her. And she had never lied, not truly, just carried the truth in a different room behind a door he never thought to open. And now that door had been flung wide and he couldn't unsee what lay beyond it. Yet in the ache of revelation there was something else blooming. Pride. She had done something beautiful, something selfless, something brave. She had loved without needing to be seen, had given without needing praise. Her silence wasn't shame, it was sacrifice. She had chosen his peace over her own recognition, and in doing so had shaped a life, had given a boy a home, a future. And now Richard found himself grieving not just her absence, but the life he never thought he wanted. A life with the boy who had called her mom in his own quiet way. He traced the edges of a photo. Amelia with her arms wrapped around Noah, their laughter frozen in time, her eyes glowing with a joy he hadn't seen. Not because it wasn't there, but because he hadn't looked closely enough. He wanted to believe she knew he would understand eventually, that she had hoped this day would come, even if she wouldn't be there to see it. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Standing in the doorway was Noah, older now, a man in his early 20s, unsure, grieving, and yet grounded in the love she had given him. They looked at each other, not as strangers, but as two people drawn together by the same woman, the same loss, the same need to make sense of it all. Richard stood, walked over, and without a word embraced him. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but in that moment something shifted. The silence that had defined so much of Amelia's love now gave way to understanding. And maybe, just maybe, in that shared grief they could both find a way forward. Together. Lena sat at the edge of the wooden bench, her fingers curled tightly around a chipped teacup, steam rising and curling into the air between her and Richard like memories she hadn't dared breathe in for years. Outside, the wind pushed against the old windows, rattling them like distant echoes of the life she had left behind. She was the only one who cared, Lena said, her voice cracking around the words, barely above a whisper. Richard didn't speak. He knew better. Lena had carried this weight too long, and the silence between them now was not absence, it was reverence. She took a deep breath, her eyes tracing something invisible on the floor, and began again. It was the middle of winter, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your skin feel like paper. My mother was gone by then, taken by the fever, and my father had already vanished into the bottle months before. We had nothing. No heat, no food. I was trying to keep my little brother warm with newspapers stuffed into his coat. He was 5. Her voice faltered. He didn't understand why we had to stay so quiet, or why we couldn't cry when we were hungry. I didn't understand much either, just that the world had stopped being kind. She looked up, her eyes shimmering but defiant, as if daring the past to try and take her down again. Then came Amelia. Her name hung in the room like a light. She was just there one day out of nowhere. A knock on the door when no one else would even look at us. I thought it was a mistake. She had this coat with buttons that caught the light and gloves stitched like something from another world. I remember thinking, she doesn't belong here. But she smiled, really smiled, and held out this loaf of bread like it was treasure. I couldn't even speak, just stared at her like a ghost. Lena paused, swallowing hard. The next day she came again, and the day after that. Always with something, a tin of soup, scarves, a storybook. And not just things. We had people bring things before, sometimes charity. But she stayed. She sat with us, talked to me like I was someone, asked me what I liked to read, what I dreamed about. No one had asked me that since before the sickness. I told her I liked stories about faraway places, castles, explorers. She brought me a book the next week, The Secret Garden. I read it by candlelight, trying to make the pages last. Her fingers loosened on the teacup, her knuckles softening. Amelia didn't ask for anything. Not thanks, not credit. She just kept coming back. When the landlord came to evict us, she showed up with a coat for my brother, boots that actually fit. She held my hand and said, "You don't have to do this alone." I didn't believe her. I had learned not to believe anyone. But she kept showing up, and eventually, I did. I believed her. Lena blinked back the tears, but one slipped through, trailing down her cheek in silence. Richard reached for her hand, and she let him. She found us a place, temporary housing run by a church in the next town. Got us in, drove us there herself, Stayed until my brother fell asleep that first night. And before she left, she pressed this tiny notebook into my hand. Said, "You write your story now, Lena. The world needs to hear it." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. That was the last time I saw her. She said she had other places to be, other people to help. I never got to say thank you the way I wanted. I still have the notebook. It's full now, every page. Stories, thoughts, scraps of dreams I've taped in over the years. I read them sometimes just to remember that I was loved, that someone saw me. She turned to Richard fully now, her voice steadier, though her eyes still shimmered with the flood of memory. People talk about angels. I don't know what I believe. But Amelia, she was light when everything else was dark. I was invisible before her, just another girl falling through the cracks. But she looked at me like I mattered, like I could be something more than a sad story. And for the first time I started to believe that too. Richard squeezed her hand, words still caught in his throat. There was nothing he could say that would do her story justice. Lena looked back out the window, the wind quieter now, as if even the world was listening. "It's strange," she whispered, "how a person can change your whole life with just kindness. Not grand gestures, just being there, really being there." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "I've spent so long trying to become the kind of person she believed I could be." She paused. "I hope I have." Richard Lawson had built empires with his bare hands, carving his name into skylines, stock markets, and the covers of magazines, Forbes, Fortune, Time. They called him a genius, a tycoon, a modern Midas who turned everything he touched into gold. But as he knelt on the soft grass of the cemetery, beside the tiny girl who clutched a daisy in one hand and looked up at him with her mother's quiet, searching eyes, none of that mattered anymore. His $1,000 suit was soaked at the knees, dampened not just by the dew but by the weight of a man broken, a man too late. Her name was Claire, his daughter, and she had turned 5 the week before, a birthday he hadn't attended. He had sent gifts, of course, too many, wrapped in shiny ribbons and piled high like trophies. But Claire didn't want toys or castles or dolls with diamond eyes. She wanted a bedtime story, a walk in the park, a note in her lunchbox with a heart drawn on it, just like her mother used to do. Her mother, Emily, was gone now. Cancer had crept into her body while Richard was in Singapore closing a merger. He remembered the day she told him, how her voice shook on the phone, how he paused, looked at his watch and said, "We'll talk when I'm back." But he was always back, too late. Each treatment she endured, she faced alone, never asking for pity, only presence. And presence was the one thing Richard could never give. Not when there were boardrooms to conquer, deals to secure, and reputations to maintain. He had built a fortress of power around himself, but it had kept out the very things that gave life meaning. As Claire gently placed the daisy on her mother's grave, Richard's heart cracked under the strain of everything unsaid and undone. Emily had been more than his wife. She had been his compass, his conscience, the quiet light in the windows of a house that had long ago stopped feeling like home. She had written him letters he never read, sang lullabies to Claire he never heard, and waited on nights when the clock ticked past midnight, and the front door never opened. And still she loved him. She had loved him not for his power, but despite it. That truth stung more than any headline ever could. The sky above turned a dull gray, echoing the silence that surrounded them. Richard reached out and touched the stone marker. Emily Lawson, beloved wife and mother, 1987 to 2025. The finality of it hit him like ice in his veins. There would be no more second chances. No dinner table confessions, no hand-holding in hospital rooms, no whispered "I'm sorry" under a shared blanket. He had robbed himself of the very moments money could never buy. And now all he had was Claire, a stranger by blood, yet the last piece of Emily still breathing. Richard looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the daughter he had neglected, but the child who had quietly carried her mother's grief and grace. Claire didn't flinch as tears streamed down his face. She simply reached out and held his hand, as if forgiving him for sins he hadn't yet forgiven himself. That small gesture, so innocent, so pure, undid him entirely. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "I should have been here." Claire nodded, saying nothing, and leaned her head against his arm. The cemetery was still, save for the rustle of leaves and the echo of memories. Richard thought of the nights Emily had waited for him to come home, the way her eyes would light up even when disappointment settled behind them. He thought of her laugh, unfiltered and bright, a sound that once made his heart race faster than the stock market ever could. He had measured success in numbers, in accolades, in the applause of strangers, but standing there beside his daughter, he realized he had failed at the only thing that truly mattered, loving fully and being present. For the first time in years, Richard didn't think about his next meeting, his next acquisition, or how to spin this moment into a redemption arc for the press. He just wanted to be there with Claire, to learn how to braid her hair the way Emily used to make her pancakes on Sundays, to tell her stories where the heroes weren't businessmen but fathers who showed up. And maybe, just maybe, if he could teach her how to live with an open heart, he could honor Emily's memory in a way no gravestone ever could. As the rain began to fall in soft droplets, Richard didn't move. He let it wash over him, a baptism of guilt and grace. He held Claire close, silently vowing that the man who had missed the chance to know his wife's full heart would not miss the chance to earn his daughter's. Richard's fingers trembled ever so, slightly as he reached out to take Lena's hand into his own. The world around them seemed to still, as if holding its breath in reverence for the fragile moment unfolding between them. The silence was thick, not heavy with despair but rich with an unspoken understanding, a shared ache that had woven their lives together in ways neither could have anticipated. Lena's eyes, shimmering with tears that had long refused to fall, met his. In her gaze was the reflection of all they had lost and the faintest glimmer of something new, something fragile and precious, waiting to be nurtured. Amelia's memory lingered in the air like a bittersweet fragrance, tender and unyielding. She was the thread that had tied Richard and Lena together in grief, the anchor of their sorrow and the muse of their unspoken promises. Richard bent his head, pressing a reverent kiss to the back of Lena's hand, his touch feather-light but weighted with deep sincerity. It was not merely a gesture of comfort, it was a vow, an unbreakable promise whispered in the language of the heart. "I promise," he said softly, his voice steady though the emotion beneath it threatened to overflow, "to honor Amelia's memory every single day, not just in remembrance but in how I will care for you, cherishing you as if you were my own." The words hung in the air between them, a delicate bridge spanning the chasm of their shared loss. For so long the past had held them captive, shadows of regret and unspoken truths casting a pall over their every interaction. Yet in that moment, those shadows began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile new light born from the ashes of sorrow and the embers of hope. Lena's breath hitched, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over her as she felt the warmth of Richard's hand envelop hers. Her fingers tightened ever so slightly in response, a silent affirmation that this was no fleeting comfort, but the foundation of something lasting and true. The past was not forgotten, it never could be, but it no longer held dominion over their hearts. Instead, it became a foundation, a sacred ground from which they could begin again. The weight of Amelia's memory was immense, an unshakable presence in their lives that shaped their fears and hopes alike. But Richard's promise was a lifeline, a beacon that would guide them through the uncertain days ahead. It was a commitment to carry the past with grace, allowing it to enrich their future rather than chain them to grief. Richard understood that honoring Amelia meant more than remembrance. It meant embracing Lena with an open heart, offering the kind of care and love that could heal the wounds left behind. He vowed to protect her, to stand beside her through every storm and every quiet moment in between. This was not about replacing the irreplaceable, but about forging a new bond, a shared journey toward healing and redemption. As they stood together, their hands entwined, a profound peace settled over them. It was fragile, yes, like a delicate glass sculpture that could shatter if handled carelessly. But it was also real. In that fragile peace lay the promise of renewal, the possibility that love could bloom even after loss had stripped them bare. Lena's heart, once so guarded and fractured, dared to hope again. The smile that blossomed on her lips was small but radiant, a quiet declaration that she was ready to move forward, not alone, but with Richard by her side. Their pasts, with all their scars, were threads in the tapestry of their lives. Together they would weave these threads into something new, something beautiful. This new chapter was not simply about moving on. It was about moving through pain, through grief, through fear, toward a future that held promise and truth. It was a journey of redemption, not just for Richard, but for them both. a chance to find light in the darkness and love amidst loss. The promise Richard made was more than words. It was a pledge of presence, of unwavering support and genuine care. It was an acknowledgement that healing takes time, that love requires patience, and that the deepest bonds are forged in the fires of shared experience. Beneath the vast, quiet sky that stretched endlessly above them, dotted with stars that seemed to shine just a little brighter in that sacred moment, Richard and Lena stepped forward together. They carried with them the weight of their pasts, yes, but also the strength to create something new, something built on truth, resilience, and hope. The memory of Amelia would remain a guiding light, not a shadow that darkened their days. In honoring her, they honored themselves and the possibility of happiness yet to come. The promise was a seed planted in the fertile soil of their hearts, destined to grow and flourish with time, care, and love. It was a declaration that while loss had shaped them, it would not define them. In Richard's gentle kiss and the quiet promise that followed, Lena found the courage to believe in a future where love could heal and redemption was possible. Together, they would write a new story, one of hope, renewal, and the enduring power of love's embrace. In the quiet aftermath of losing Amelia, Richard felt as though the very air around him had shifted. The world was both emptier and fuller, haunted by her absence yet illuminated by the indelible mark she had left on his heart. Amelia had been more than a wife, more than a companion. She was a force of kindness, a champion for those whose voices too often went unheard. Her unwavering compassion, especially for children facing hardship, had been a beacon during their life together, a light Richard had come to rely on. But with her sudden departure, that light seemed to flicker dangerously close to extinguishing. Yet amidst the raw pain, Richard discovered a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. He realized that Amelia's love was not meant to fade with her life, but was a flame to be kindled anew, a legacy to be nurtured and shared. In her honor, he made a vow to build something lasting, a foundation that would embody the very essence of who she was, and extend her boundless compassion to children whose futures were clouded by poverty, neglect, and hopelessness. Thus, the Amelia Foundation was born, not merely as a charitable organization, but as a living testament to Amelia's belief in second chances and the transformative power of love. Richard poured his heart and soul into this mission, channeling his grief into action, driven by memories of Amelia's gentle insistence that every child deserved a chance to flourish. Among the many children touched by the foundation was Lena, a girl whose life story echoed the very struggles Amelia had quietly championed. Lena came from a world marked by hardship, a childhood marred by instability and scarcity, where dreams were often swallowed by harsh realities. Yet beneath the surface of struggle there burned a fierce resilience, a spark that Richard recognized instantly. Through the Amelia Foundation, Lena was given not just material support but a community that believed in her, a space where she could heal, learn, and grow. Her journey mirrored the Foundation's,